And we're broadcasting. People are beginning to trickle in. All right, welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn webinar. We are very excited to be talking about building your digital team with Jill here from Insperity. Insperity is both a member and a proud supporter of Tech United. We are so excited to have you here sharing with us, answering our questions, and just generally like guiding an awesome conversation about how to build your digital team. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jill. We cannot wait. I want to make sure that people in the audience, and we'll reiterate this in the chat as well, chime in, ask questions, share feedback. We want this to be interactive. We're going to be asking you to answer questions and give us your thoughts. And if there's anything you can even start thinking about now about what you're struggling with or what's been challenging you, or even what's gone right as you build your digital team, please throw that in the chat. If you have specific questions for Jill, you can also put them in the Q&A, and I'll be moderating all of that for you. But I'm going to turn things right over to you, Jill, to introduce yourself and get today's webinar started. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Fantastic, guys. Well, I'm excited to be here. Again, my name's Jill Chapman. I've been with Insperity for quite a few years now, and most closely tied to our recruiting efforts at Insperity, both for our internal hires as well as working with our clients. So I guess that makes me maybe uniquely qualified to speak to this idea about building your digital team. And to Jasmine's point, we want this to be interactive. You don't want to sit and listen to me just drone on and on. So please, share with us where your struggles are, where your excitement is around this topic, and then we can begin to build into the conversation. I have a few talking points that'll kind of keep us on track to make sure we do, use this time wisely. But definitely, we want you to participate to the fullest extent, because when we think about this topic, what we're really thinking about is something far much more than just using online job boards or using social media so that you can attract talent to your organization. What we're going to talk about today is the entire recruitment process from start to finish and how we can digitize every step along the way. I think really where this conversation took hold was, all thanks to the COVID-19, right? Because we were 6 feet apart, we were practicing social distancing. We didn't want to go into the office, so how on earth could we bring an applicant into our office, right? So this idea started to gain a lot of traction, because of COVID-19, because we couldn't suspend hiring, right? We had to figure out how to take it virtual. So now that we're here, and we're learning a lot of, best practices and things like that. That's what we want to talk about today. So, just to kind of frame up our conversation, to give us some ideas about what we're going to be talking about, we will definitely be talking about using job boards to advertise and posting on career websites. We'll talk a little bit about mobile recruiting and online assessments and social recruiting and virtual interviewing, all of these pieces and parts that you're going to be able to use to find, attract, analyze, select, and actually make a hire to fill your open roles. So it's like I said before, it's the full gamut, largely driven because of coronavirus. But my hope is that you're going to consider adopting some or all of these processes, even post-pandemic, right? Because I think the advantages to this are many for us. I got to coordinate myself with my different slides here and different screens here, and I'm a little awkward. So what are some of the advantages? Well, I think that basically, it goes without saying that we can extend our reach, right? We can reach far more applicants around the world and be able to reach in to identify passive candidates as well. And passive candidates, that passive talent is really typically our target candidate pool. Very interestingly, this morning I was reading a report from the conference board, and it was talking about some of the things the labor market is enduring or finding in this COVID world that we're living in. And one of the things that, one of the points that was made from this research was, it's still a tight job market. It's still difficult to hire. And you would think when you read the unemployment numbers that, wow, it should be easy. But those numbers aren't really painting the right picture when we look at the high numbers of folks on unemployment or availing themselves of unemployment right now for a number of reasons. And one of those is just the fact that a lot of the people who are getting unemployment right now are actually furloughed employees. And so they're planning on going back. So they're not actively seeking and searching for new opportunities because their plan is to return to the jobs they once had. I think that the bigger number from how much people are making on unemployment also plays into it. For a couple of reasons there. Number one, they're making more money than possibly they even made when they were actually working. And when they're facing making more money, and the alternative is maybe that they have issues with childcare now because of schools and the way that school is being done, or maybe they have some fear of the virus itself, or the fact that now we're looking at flus and strep throat and everything else in addition to the viruses. So there's maybe a drive or maybe a lack of interest in returning right away to the workforce. Another thing that we've found is some people are opting out of the labor force. We're seeing an inordinate number of women decide that they aren't going to participate in the labor force, at least for the moment. If not for longer term. And perhaps they've opted to, again, with some of the childcare issues, and I know that's probably painting a pretty broad brush, but for a number of reasons, we're seeing women more than others that are not coming back into the workforce at the same numbers. We're also seeing a number of those more mature workers that decided to not come back as well. And there's a couple of things about this recessionary time, if you want to call it a recession, that's been different than in the past, and it's made those people not as eager to come back into the workforce, maybe to go ahead and take retirement or even an early retirement. Because unlike other recessions that we've lived through, stock market really wasn't damaged. Housing prices really weren't damaged. And so some of those things that might drive you to stay in the workforce a little bit longer aren't existing right now. So it's been a very unique time. So I just want to underscore the fact that if we can move to a digital recruiting strategy, we're going to have a further reach, and we need it because that war for talent is still very, very strong. I also think that there's increased efficiencies by using a digital platform in order to help us to do our recruiting. It's going to help us in sourcing. It's going to help us in selecting. We can do some things that make us a lot more efficient than doing it by hand, if you will. And even hiring of candidates, which takes less time. Again, to that fact for the war for talent. When you got to strike when the iron's hot, right? So making sure that we're using these digital tools helps us to do it faster. And our communication is much more manageable, right? Because we can automate a lot of this and we can automate a significant number of parts to our recruiting process. And then obviously a higher ROI, because while you'll need to invest, right, in developing and implementing some of the strategy, I think that the ROI is usually going to come out higher than a traditional recruitment methods, because if you do it effectively, you're going to hire the top performers in a much shorter time frame. So are there any good questions or conversation around maybe the talent market? Anybody want to argue with me on some of those points or get involved in the conversation at this juncture?
I'll keep an eye on the chat, Jill, but I do have a question about your comment about women opting out of the labor force, which is, or even working parents, right? Like you're saying it's looking like it's more women, but I want to try to be a little more broad here and talk about working parents. Like, what can organizations that are hiring do to be more inclusive or structure their opportunity in a way that can still include folks that are taking care of childcare. And
so that's going to play into our policies and our practices about largely the remote workforce or a flexible schedule. If somebody can see the benefits and be able to manage both, maybe it'll be a little bit more attractive. But if I'm going to have to worry about identifying alternative schooling methodologies, if I'm going to have to worry about additional daycare costs and things like that, there's going to be that, that tipping point where it just doesn't seem to make sense anymore. Traditional situations be darned, right? But I think that a lot of this does still fall to the realm of the moms to be able to make some decisions about what's going to make the most sense. So if we can keep our pay rates competitive, if we can make it make sense, I think we just have to paint that picture, right? It goes back to the employment brand. And what we've been able to share about our organizations, and particularly how we handled the COVID, right? What was our response as companies to the COVID? I think gives a lot of encouragement to somebody who's maybe on the fence, trying to decide what they want to do next. And if we can demonstrate that we acted responsibly as an organization, that we took care of our employees, that we did all the right things and offer opportunity to understand that the whole person comes to work, right? And that we respect both the work-life balance, if you will, the wellness of our folks. I think that would do a lot for the messaging to be able to attract and encourage them to come back into the workforce or come specifically to our organizations. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. No, that totally makes sense. I think it's something that we have a women in tech group here, and it's come up a few times talking about how sometimes childcare falls onto the mom and how to handle that. And there's a whole other kind of gender conversation to have there. Like it's opening a whole new door. But I did get a question.
Necessarily the PC thing to talk about, but reality is what it is, right? And so we've got to come up with strategies that we can try to make the best of what's available to us and encourage people to stay active and stay in the workforce, because we need them. We need everybody, right? Yeah. We've really got those cases. And really, when we think about those unemployment numbers, if you peel back a layer or two, you're going to find that they come out of one or two industries, right? And there were a significant number of us that never stopped hiring during the COVID, and new things that sprung up because of the COVID, new opportunities and some innovations in ingenuity in business. And so it created an opportunity for new things to spring up and new needs from the labor force. So.
For sure. And with that, it ties in perfectly to a question we got from Donna here in the chat, which is if you've noticed, specific types of positions that you're specifically recruiting for, any niches, like are there any trends you've noticed during COVID that are different than what Insperity typically has helped recruiting for in the past?
Well, I do think that we saw a little bit of, quite frankly, we're as busy as we've ever been in hiring for our clients. As a matter of fact, we actually saw some new clients come into our fold because of the extra needs as it related to COVID. I think that we're still looking at those general kinds of, if you want to look at the big buckets, we can talk about IT for sure. Accounting, finance, sales, and marketing. When there is a downturn or a feel of a downturn in the economy, a lot of organizations, forward thinking, will start to add to their sales force so that they'll be on the ready side for when things bounce back. Another thing that we've seen out of this, I call it a recession. I don't really know if it's a recession. I don't know if it fits the definition of that, but what we saw really is that commodities did well, services were the areas that were hit a little bit harder, right? And that doesn't usually happen in a recession either, right? So there's been a lot of stuff that's been new and weird. And so it's really, for a lot of industry and a lot of kinds of jobs, it's been business as usual. So we've been active, sales and marketing, accounting, finance, healthcare for sure, IT, even our manufacturing and our light industrial and office automation, office operational type roles have stayed busy throughout the pandemic for us. So, maybe a certain industry or two that was hardest hit, but across the board, we're having opportunities for every ilk, every kind of person that we've ever been placing. So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how we go out and find the people who are going to fill those jobs for us when we're thinking about kind of moving to this digital platform and doing everything digitally. And so we have to talk about social media, right?
And by the way, I know you're going to talk about this, I think, but I do have a few more questions. Do you think we can answer them before you get into this part?
Let's do it.
Okay. So we did have a question, and I know you might go into it right now, but how do you balance between people that lost jobs and people who are able to get new jobs? Like, how do you think this ratio might look like going forward post-pandemic?
Oh, well, I think what you need to think about if you're looking to bring people into your organization is you want to fish in both ponds, right? You want to make sure that you're getting the right, best person for the job. So you want to look at both at both sides of that equation, right? You want to be active with the active candidates, those people who have been riffed or find themselves out of work largely due to COVID. So you want to be active with the active, but you don't want to forget about those passive candidates. So I'd probably kind of 50-50, I'd make sure that I kept my finger in both situations. If I was having to make a choice, I wouldn't make a choice. I would do both.
Do both. Excellent. I think that makes sense, right? Like, you always it's just like how you try to get multiple bids for something. You want to be able to include all.
And the cool thing about going digital is you can, right? You can cast a hugely wide net and be able to get the folks that you need to respond.
Absolutely. We got two more questions. Okay. One of them is about, as you're in a similar kind of equity conversation, how do you go about sort of making sure compensation towards the end of the deal is fair between men and women, or even between like skill levels?
Right. So, when we're setting compensation strategy, you're thinking about the value of that job to your organization, right? That's how you set comp strategy. It's not what the incumbent looks like. It's not who they are, whether it's a male or female taking on the role. To create good comp strategy, you're looking at the value of that role to your organization. And then it really doesn't matter, right? Because you define that, and it doesn't matter who's applying for your job. It doesn't matter who's sitting in your job. You know what the value of that is to your company. And really, honestly, we're seeing some movement across the country. It started in a few jurisdictions here and there, but it's moving around the country to make it where we just don't talk about that sort of thing from a standpoint of what did you make in your last job, right? That's not that has no bearing on what that job is worth to you as an organization. So to have these conversations up front to say, this is the job and this is how much it pays. You want in? You don't want in? I don't know.
And so you find it's helpful upfront to share the salary and upfront the compensation.
Yeah, why wouldn't let's cut to the chase. Let's say this is the value of this job. If you want it, let's go through the process. If that's not right for you, okay, cool. It's not right for you.
Right.
And awesome. There might be something else later on, but I think to be settled and understand how these roles play takes that disparity out of the equation, right?
For sure. And then the final question, at least for right now, is how are you recommending candidates upskill for jobs, even right now or even post-COVID? I know you mentioned there were a few unique opportunities that came out of this.
Right. And I think that there's going to be some of us as employers that are also going to have to think about this. How do we upskill the people that we've kept, right? Because things are changing and things are going to continue to change. We've been watching this happen forever. I've always kind of described that when COVID showed up, it's like the future of work showed up on that same day, right? Things that we've been talking about for years, all of a sudden we had to do. Work from home, stop traveling, doing, the things that were related to COVID. So from the standpoint of upskilling our workforce, I think we're all going to be in this together. I think that to understand how technology is going to drive the future of our businesses and our systems and our processes that we might have had that was a little bit more either paper intensive or manual are going to be automated. You know, AI is everywhere. It's doing a good job. We're going to talk about AI as it relates to recruiting, but I think we're all going to have to take a hard look. If you happen to be tuned in to this webinar and you're in between jobs right now, then think ahead. Think about what your job would morph into if technology played a bigger part of your daily operation or your daily responsibilities, and then make sure that you're poised and ready for that. And whether that means that we're going to offload some of the more repetitive tasks to our systems, and we're going to then want to identify people who are the creative side of these things, right? The things that the machines can't do for us, and that so that folks may have to understand bigger pictures. I teach a lot working with HR folks in the community and talking about how, you know, for years we've talked about HR getting a seat at the table, right? Being in consideration when business leaders are making decisions. And again, with the COVID, I think that drove HR, like they probably knocked some people out away from the table because all of a sudden we began to see some of the importance of HR. But I've always told HR people, you got to understand how your company makes money, right? You got to understand the business of your business. And I think all of us need to understand that so that we can see where the opportunities are, where the innovation could come in. And then we're poised and ready to be able to help with that. That's a long way around a very simple question, but I hope I answered it.
No, it's great. And I'll let you get through a few more slides and I'll continue to pepper in some more questions.
That's fantastic, because when we start to think about these people that we want to bring into our organization, we can't talk about a digital recruiting strategy without talking about the use of social media. From a cost perspective, it is probably the most efficient way to cast a wide net for top talent. You know, everybody's there, right? Now, where they are in social media matters, right? You have to understand the persona of the candidate that you're trying to attract and where do they hang out, what's right for them. And so understanding who it is that you're searching for will help you to identify what social media strategies are going to be the smartest. But folks who have a solid social media recruiting strategy, time after time, see an improvement in the candidate quality, right? But you've got to figure out who your ideal candidate is and where they're hanging out online. And then you publish content on your sources that engages these people and begins to convert them from just a passive, oh, I'm kind of interested in that company, somebody who takes an active participation with your social media channels. And so, you know, you can try a bunch of different things to really kind of figure out what works best. You can put your job postings on LinkedIn. You could use videos on YouTube to have employee testimonials. You might tweet about your company awards or events that your company's having. You might establish a presence on Facebook, but try a variety of these things to see what compels your target market from a candidate perspective. And, you know, you don't have to just think about the big guys, right? The traditional social media platforms. You could think about those forums that are out there that are more specific to what it is that you do. But whatever you do, use your social media to allow quick access to your application process, right? Build that bridge so that very quickly when they're inspired by your content, that they can do something about it. And so make sure that that you're allowing quick access to your application process, and make sure that you're monitoring your social media channels, right? So you need to have somebody who's available and who's keeping an eye on these things so you can respond when candidates might post a question or want to interact with you, right? You know, think about using hashtags, but if you're using hashtags, then you've got to be watching those hashtags so that when people do use them, that you're Johnny on the spot, you're ready to do that. So another thing too, it doesn't just need to be one person within your organization that's kind of responsible for these social media posts, but encourage your employees to get active on social media. Encourage them to forward job opportunities out to their followers or their connections on social media. Today we're live with this on social media, right? And hosting events online on different social media platforms can really increase your engagement as well. And then, of course, there's some paid options too that you can do to try to either geofence somebody or geofence an area or target a specific market once you understand who your chosen candidate is. Honestly, I don't think anybody needs to be convinced that social media is going to be important. But one thing that I also want to share is the tracking of how successful your social media is. I don't know if you are familiar with UTM technology, right? It's where you can put that simple string of text at the end of your URL so that you can know where it is that these people are coming from, right? You might want to add a job title or where the ad appeared, right? Maybe it's your specific Facebook group, or maybe it's the site, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it might be. And then you'll be able to see how much traffic you're driving from which places. So you want to make sure that you're using technology to help you to gauge your success on social media. Spent a little time kind of talking about slightly some of the content, but you want to make sure that it's relevant content that you're sharing so that you can engage these candidates more productively. So clearly that's going to be on your social media handles, but don't overlook your company website as well, right? If you don't already have a landing page for connecting with candidates, if you don't have a career site, hey, that's a relatively inexpensive way to engage with your candidate pool. So use your company website, have external blogs. We've been very, very successful in using blogs as a way to attract someone to our organization that might not have been thinking about it otherwise, but because of the content of our blogs, it was compelling enough for them to want to connect with us. Again, involving your employees, getting testimonials, getting stories from them, and any kind of industry news so that you show that you're on top of things, you know what's going on, but you need to be active with it. So that's one thing. I also tell this to job seekers, right? You don't want to just build a site out and then never go to it, right? And not be active with it. That's kind of, I don't know. It's not creepy, but it's a little suspicious, I think. So whenever you're adding to your online game, right, it's really going to be important that you manage that activity, right? You manage comments, you manage reviews. You've got somebody that's checking on Glassdoor and some of these sites that where people can leave comments about their experience either as a candidate or as an employee with your organization. So you want to make sure that you're keeping up with it. You want to make sure that the picture that you're painting is true, right? You don't want to look like one thing on social media and when somebody shows up live within your organization, they get a completely different picture. I usually get at this point some questions about, what if I had a bad review on Glassdoor? What do I do? Well, you don't want to ignore it. Okay, so, but you also don't want to get into a full-scale argument either, right? You don't want to be passive aggressive, but you want to emphasize your commitment to constant improvement. You want to thank them for bringing something to your attention. And you want to demonstrate, the whole point of this is to demonstrate they actually listen, right? So that if I was going to join forces with you, I would know that if I had an issue or something that you would listen to me. So what you're trying to point out is that you listen and that you work to try to rectify the situation. So again, you don't want to get in a full-scale war of words with somebody online, but you want to make sure that you acknowledge everything out there. Does that make sense?
That definitely makes sense. Yeah. And I'm wondering if on the UTM side, I thought that was a really good point, because
Mhm.
it's really interesting to understand, if you do the same post on Twitter and LinkedIn, which one performs better, right? Because that's a really interesting way to tell, like for A/B testing and kind of looking at all the information. But as I'm thinking about kind of the tech community, what's interesting about it too is if you send it to, I don't know, alumni networks or an incubator that you were a part of as an accelerator, or some of your corporate partners. You can even use CM then, and you can say, wow, I shared my job post with Insperity. They put it out on their Twitter and 17 people clicked it, and only one person clicked it when I put it on my Twitter, or whatever it might be. Like, those are really helpful and helps you also understand when you need to make a new hire, or when you have an ask, like who to go to, who has the right audience for what you're looking for.
Right. We're seeing a lot of people envelop those kind of strategies that we used to always think were reserved for marketing,
Right.
B2B, consumer marketing,
Yeah.
where we're creating candidate personas or employee personas, and then we're mapping their journey with us. And that leads me, that's a beautiful segue into the whole idea about candidate experience, right? Now, this is a subject that we've been talking about for years, but again, with this move to being more digital, I think it puts it even in a bigger light, that we're making sure that it's easy for our candidates, and that they can opt in and perhaps opt out, because quite frankly, if they don't see that they're going to fit with your organization, let's let them excuse themselves from the process,
Sure.
right? Because who needs to go through all that, them or us? So allowing them that opportunity to kind of see themselves fitting in or not within your organization. But the candidate experience is key, because this is our courting period, right? This is where we're setting the table, if you will, for what their employee experience is going to be like, right? This is how we're going to get to employee engagement. We're going to start it now with the candidate experience. So I would suggest that if you haven't done it in a while, that you shop your own process, act like you're an employee, right? Or get somebody to do that for you. And they can tell you where things might be broken in the process, right? But you want to evaluate where you sit right now and where there's opportunity for improvement. Some things that you must do, just must do's for a good candidate experience, is communicating as clearly and as regularly as possible. I don't think anybody has an expectation that you would necessarily make them a job offer today, right? Or a job offer tomorrow, but they want to know where they sit, because to put their resume into your applicant tracking system, or to start a conversation with you only to have a black hole appear, right, is very dangerous. And it sets me up mentally. I'm thinking, wow, if they communicate this poorly with me right now, what on earth it's going to be like when I get to work and I need a new pencil or something like that? Like how hard is it going to be to get somebody to respond to me at work? So you're beginning to kind of lay that groundwork for what the patterns will be when they come on board with you. So communicating, right? Let them know what's going on with their application process. What are the next steps? What can they expect? And let's say you say, when they leave and a conversation with you, hey, we've got other people to talk to. It's probably going to be about 2 weeks. And you find yourself kind of an emergency arises or something within your organization. It's going to be much longer than 2 weeks. Reach out to them and let them know. Say, hey, I know I promised you that we would reconvene in a couple of weeks. I've got some things that have taken precedence over what we're doing right now, but I just wanted to let you know this is where we sit right now. But try to stay as close to your hiring timeline. This is important. Right. This is the biggest spend you're going to have largely over the course of the life of an employee. So it's critical that that you handle it with that sense of reverence, right, to what it really is to your organization. So
do you recommend people, it can sometimes be daunting if you get several hundred applications to a job, to communicate effectively with all of them? Mm-hmm. Do you normally recommend using some sort of CRM or tool so that you're able to quickly, press a button and send a note saying, hey, we're reviewing applications now, I got an update in a week, or at least like providing, I think the biggest thing is not only just communicating, but it's communicating with value or with timelines or dates or information. I think we've all probably had those things that's like, thanks for submitting your application, we'll be in touch soon.
Right.
like, thanks for sending me that. You did communicate with me, but I didn't learn anything.
Right.
Like,
So,
how do you navigate that?
yeah. So I don't think that anybody is opposed to getting some things that look rather automated when they
Yeah.
come out. But to your point, that there's some value there. Um,
Yeah.
and and honestly, if it's not a right fit, letting that person know as soon as you recognize, or that
Right.
your system recognizes this probably is not the right fit. That allows them the opportunity to get over it and move on, and look for a place where they are a right fit. So being able to communicate as honestly, as transparently as possible, but with some expectations, right? Here's what's next. So I think definitely, as you accept an application, to have something that immediately says, I got it. It didn't go into a black hole. I got it. I'm just out there in the, somewhere in cyberspace. But so being able to communicate that, because that's a real fear of a job seeker, is that I sent it and I have no idea if anybody, where it went. And then, to even automate some of the steps in between, I think that's okay. But again, to your point, is being clear with the expectations, what you expect from the organization. So automation is not a bad thing. And you can do a lot to make that automation look somewhat personal, right?
Right. You can automate it to have even your feedback, right? Like, you can have blank fields to fill in with your notes with their name. Like, I think people hear automation and they're very much against it because they don't want to seem impersonal, right? They don't want to get that Glassdoor note that's like, they just sent me a forum email.
Right.
But I think being that we're tech united, right? And we like to talk about leveraging technology, it can help. And that also might even help with the process after they've been rejected, right? Like, most people want to know, what did I do wrong? What can I improve on? Why wasn't I chosen for the role?
Right. And you don't want to get too deep into some of those conversations with your candidates, because you can get off into,
I'm sure
it can be bad news, right? But I think to give them some sort of feedback, and to allow them to give you feedback too, right? This needs to be a two-way street. So let them talk to you about what they liked about the process, what they appreciated in the process, or, hey, do you have any suggestions for us? So kind of creating those feedback loops at different points. And it's not just in the talent attraction, it's all the way through the process, right? It's the interviewing, the assessments, and all the things that we do, even the offer stage, to make sure that we're connecting, and they're learning from us and we're learning from them. I think that's important for us to know. Now, I would think that probably some of us joined this call because they were thinking about the whole idea of video interviewing, right? That seems daunting. And there's a number of ways that you can use the technology to help you with interviewing. You can do self-recorded interviews. You can do live interviews, or you can do a hybrid mix that at this juncture, they're going to be self-recorded and then we'll move to the live. You can use it however it best fits, but there's some pros and some cons, really, to each kind of platform, if you will. So a lot of times people will use those self-recorded video interviews, and you guys know what I'm talking about here, right? That the candidate is given a list of kind of stock questions that you want to ask, and then they just respond at their leisure, and send you a recording of their responses to those that set of question. And so what's obvious as a benefit to that is, number one, they can do it at their own time. So if you are having to rely on passive candidates, those who are currently otherwise employed, maybe that's a great fit for them because they can do it at their leisure after hours. Maybe they'll be in their home environment, and maybe that's a little bit more of an opportunity to see the real them, right? To get an opportunity for them to be a little bit more relaxed. If they can get over that fear of being on the camera, they may be a little bit more relaxed. You as a hiring manager, the benefits to you is that you also get to look at it when you have time, right? And it's saving everybody time. You don't have to drive somewhere. The candidate doesn't have to drive somewhere. We don't have to get dressed up necessarily, or maybe from here up, we have to get dressed up. But there's a lot of things that, benefits from a time perspective in those free recorded interviews. It gives you an opportunity to kind of cut through to get to those next steps, which are usually taking the face-to-face interview and putting it on Zoom or some sort of technology that allows you to do a back and forth, right? A live interview.
Right.
I think,
And
yeah.
we did get a question.
Okay, sure.
Just about if you anticipate if there could be a possibility where the employer would never meet the candidate or employee in person from the interview to hiring to working until they leave the company for another opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have clients that are performing that way now, right? That it is all virtual, and so there's some benefits to that in that no longer do you have to hire the C player from your neighborhood, right? You can go get that A player from somewhere else, and it doesn't even have to be in the U.S. necessarily. It really expands that talent pool. But we have seen a lot of our clients that even before the COVID, were doing everything virtually and never ever were in the same room. Now, we can spend some time talking about culture and transitioning culture in a more virtual environment, and how do you get people on board with some of that, and that's difficult if you're never ever going to have opportunity to rub elbows with those folks on your staff, not even going to conventions or conferences and seminars and things like that, and opportunities to kind of meet in person. But a lot of people have already been doing this for a lot of years very successfully. So I wouldn't let that be a reason that I would be scared. There's plenty of example out there that people have been doing this successfully for a very long time. So if you're thinking about moving to a 100% remote workforce, and then you have to think about this on top of it, it'll work. You just have to be purposeful and very
work at it.
Yeah. It's something that will take energy, but it's certainly doable. There's plenty of test cases out there to prove it.
Right. And there's no regulatory or security concerns with that? I got that as a follow-up.
So I think what a lot of people struggle with when we start talking about using digital, video interviews and that sort of thing is a lot of our applicant tracking systems may not have a place to kind of warehouse that. Typically, though, what we're seeing most successful when we think about these video interviews, especially from the live interview standpoint, that you're probably going to conduct the interview much like you would if the person was in your office, right? And sitting there across the desk from you. You're going to take your notes, and you're going to, so all of that back end stuff looks a whole lot like it's always looked. And there's no reason to store the video interview necessarily. And so some of those concerns I think are not that realistic. I don't think that it's that big of a problem for people, because really we're just not doing it live, face to face, like in the same room, but we're doing all the same steps. If we ask behavioral based interview questions, we're still going to ask behavioral based interview questions. It's just that we're going to do it with the Zoom platform like we're doing today. So when we think about some of that, I do think that there's some things that as long as, we're all kind of coming to this in the same responsible, ethical way, right? It's just like doing an in-person interview. Now, there's a couple of things. Well, clearly, us wanting to leverage tech and in a tech environment with everybody that's on the call today, I think you might be able to use this to evaluate your candidates' ease with technology, right? Because it could get a little awkward if there's glitches and you're trying to troubleshoot and all that sort of thing, or talking on top of each other and that sort of thing. So there could be some awkwardness, but understanding that kind of acknowledging that, I guess, kind of leads us to overlook some of those sorts of things. It does give us a disadvantage at looking at some of the nonverbal clues. We can't see some of that as easily as we could possibly if they were right in front of us. And from the candidate standpoint, it does kind of limit their view of who the company is, right?
Because they're not walking in the front door and seeing everything.
They're not seeing people that are walking up and down the hall. They're just able to see what they can see during the video conference. So so those are some areas that, you may want to come up with other strategies to kind of help with that, whether that be videos of, the work in progress and testimonials from people, and an opportunity to get to talk to people besides just that hiring manager. But again, I think the pros outweigh the cons, and the pros are definitely the fact that we're expanding our candidate pool, as I said. You don't have to have somebody within commuting range of your office. I think too, the branding benefits for an employment brand sake, I think, the fact that you're open to doing it this way, and that leads to an openness about accepting these platforms as ways to get your work done too. I think that really ups your brand with the job market, that you're open to doing things on the video. Clearly, hiring speed, you don't have to wait to be able to schedule so that everybody can align, because you got travel, situations and all that sort of thing. So it really allows us to do it faster, if you will. And okay, I'm just going to say, it also gives you a chance to take a look behind the person, right? Like, you get to see what does their office setup look like? What kind of clues can I get about that individual? So sometimes it can teach you a lot about their personalities too. And if there's disruptions or some sort of digital hiccup or something like that, it gives you some insight into how they perform maybe under pressure too. So there are some clues that you can pick up, if you add that digital interview to your process, I think.
And what is your icebreaker for a digital interview? I always used to say, oh, how was the ride here? Did you take the subway? Did you get like I used to ask people like, oh, did you find the place okay? But now it's kind of funny to be like, oh, did you find the link I emailed you?
Right. Clearly you did or you didn't, right? So I think, you're going to have to get a little bit more creative with that. But and it could be as simple as just talking about how this is a unique environment where this is different, we're trying something new, acknowledging that that this is new to everybody, and then they may be able to say, no, this is the 5th interview that I've done this way, and I'm getting kind of comfortable with this whole idea. Hey, and pick their brain. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? How can we improve the process right there in the moment? But I think before we leave the topic altogether, I think we need to spend a little bit of time about talking. Again, when we talk about digital recruiting, it's not just about using, your website or these video or live interviews over Zoom or whatnot, but I think we have to look at the entire process, right? And that also includes our ability to use assessments and even our background screening. That this doesn't remove the necessity for doing some of those things. And too, when I think about assessments, we've had a lot of talk this summer, particularly, and as we move through some of the social situations that we had this summer, we get on this a lot of conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion as it works
we did get questions about that for you. A couple people were asking how you're building diversity in the top of your recruitment funnel, or the importance of diversity, inclusion in recruitment and HR management.
Right. So really, when we talk about diversity hiring, right, we're not talking about that we want to go get 4 of those and 2 of those and 1 of this. What diversity hiring is making sure that we're getting as many people in the top of the funnel as possible. Because the more the more diversity at the top of the funnel, the more that's going to come down to the bottom, right? And we've probably heard about ideas like 2 in the pool, and if you can get a diversity candidate down to that finalist category, how much more likely you are to make a hire out of the female population or out of the minority population. But one of the things that you can do with that funnel to make sure that as many people are falling through that funnel as possible is to take your assessments that you might have been doing on the back end, maybe only assessed the top 2 or 3 candidates. Maybe you push that forward in your process a little bit, because assessments have no bias, right? Like either they they do what you're supposed to do with the assessment or not. And so if you can push that forward a little bit, usually that will help you to keep more people in play longer, because they're not exposed to some of the biases that we might apply in the process. So, I just want to make sure that we understand that the assessments and background screening and all that is still a very unique part, or a necessary part of our hiring processes. And if we can add those opportunities that are more digitally robust, the ability to do the assessments online, and that sort of thing, I think we're going to be much better suited. So whether we're talking about skills-based tests or logic tests, behavioral tests, situational judgments, whatever you want to call it, but you're probably going to discover that there maybe are more qualified candidates than you would have thought, if you'll allow that higher up in the funnel. So yeah, and with that, I think, it just leads us to talk a little bit about the idea of it is an investment, the tools that you use, and making sure that your teams understand the tools, right? That if you do this investment, then you're really getting the most out of your investment. So understand what it is that you're already using, learn how to leverage those to the best of your ability, and then where are the gaps? What do we need to fill in with, so that you can take that recruitment strategy to the next level. Maybe it's that you need a CRM, right? For managing your candidate relationships, not just your customer relationships. Maybe it is that you want to add some assessment tools into your program. Maybe it's that you haven't used recruiting via social media platforms as often. But one other tip that I might share is, before you spend money, make sure that they all talk, right? That it'll all work together. I'd hate to see you invest in something and find that it's so clunky to try to get the results of that out and into the rest of your systems, that it just makes for a bad experience for you, or potentially for a poor candidate experience, right?
Right.
So any other questions, any other comments before we wrap up?
It looks like at this point we've gotten through the questions and comments. This is obviously anyone listening, your time to chime in here before Jill has to go continue being a superstar elsewhere. I think what's been interesting, and I just think it's worth mentioning this, is that we've made 2 hires during COVID. We have never met them,
Right.
and one of them we did work with Insperity to find. And it's a really in-depth process. And I think now more than ever, I want to highlight again to the people that are listening, the importance of like the social media aspect and leveraging your platforms, not just to post the job, which is great, but to allow people to get that color on your organization, to understand what you're about, because they're not, and I just realized this, they're not walking to the front door and seeing like the posters you have hanging in your office, or the vibe of the team, or even honestly just seeing everyone sitting at their desk working. Like, that makes a big impact. So anything you can do, I think, to like leverage that social media aspect, even if you film a 5-minute Zoom meeting with your team because you have a small team, you just want people to kind of get a little bit of an instinct of who you are. I think that's really helpful these days, because at the end of the day, we're working where we live and we live where we work, and like it does blur a little bit, and people want to understand not just the professionals that they're going to be working with from 9 to 5, but the people that are going to be interacting with all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about understanding who you are as an employer, right? And then being able to communicate that, get that out there. What is the value proposition to somebody who might be interested in your organization? What is it that they're going to get by working with you? And being able to articulate that and use social media and use these different platforms to really spread that word. To make sure that it's working on your behalf, right? So really understanding who you are and who you're looking for, and then using those tools and technologies that are going to help you bridge connect those two.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a few people chiming in to say good information and to thank you for giving us this presentation today.
Not a problem. I always enjoy working with your group. So anytime, you've got my contact information there. Happy to have an offline conversation. You know, if you've got a particular situation, you didn't feel like sharing it with the rest of the world, you know, be happy to talk through anything related to recruiting, and especially as it relates to digital recruiting. So.
Thank you, Jill. And this is being recorded, so we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered and attended with some more information and this recording link, so that people can also rehash it as well and pick up on anything they wanted and check in on your contact information if they do have follow-up questions. But I just want to thank you and the Insperity team again for being such great partners and supporters, and for taking the time out of your day. I know you guys have a lot going on, so I really appreciate you taking the time and walking us through this. I learned a lot, so I hope the people in the audience did too.
Good. Well, happy to be here. So call on us anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jill. Normally, if we were in person, we would do a group high five and everyone would high five their neighbor. So instead, I'm going to ask you to high five your camera on the count of 3, and then we'll send everyone to their day. Ready? 3, 2, 1. High five. All right.
It's as awkward for me as it is in real life. But you know what I learned? That if you go to high five somebody, if you look at their elbow, you look at their elbow, and that's how you make sure that you actually hit and you don't do that awkward, weird.
There we go. A little hard to do the digital elbow these days, but we'll make it work. Okay. Thank you so much again, Jill. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.